What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to do a full story video. A full story video is when I sit down and take a bunch of different videos that I did in the past and combine them together into one big video. And usually these videos kind of tell an overarching storyline in comics. And so today's full story video is going to be kind of like post-Onslaught, but only for X-Man, better known as Nate Gray, because for Nate Gray, he did play a major role in that storyline. But with the idea of Onslaught now being in the past, what's next for Nate Gray as he tries to make a life for himself in the main Marvel universe? Because remember, Nate Gray is from the age of Apocalypse reality. But with that being said, here is a full story video of Nate Gray trying to make a life for himself post-Onslaught. Okay, so I kind of want to go ahead and get back into our coverage over, well, Nate Gray, better known as X-Man. And the reason why, because it's kind of like a new direction for him at this point in time in Marvel Comics. And let me explain. You see, when it came to Nate Gray, as we all know, he had a major role in the Onslaught crossover, where you had Onslaught go out of his way to grab Nate Gray, but to also grab Franklin Richards as well. Now, with the ending of that crossover now behind us, it's Nate Gray back on his own again. But when it came to Nate, when he had left the age of Apocalypse reality and came over to the main Marvel universe, Homeboy was lost, because this was a brand new reality that was completely different from his reality. And so for Nate, he was kind of learning everything at a very fast pace. But now with the Onslaught crossover now done, it's kind of like, okay, cool. What is Nate's role going to be in this new reality that he's technically stuck in? Because now at least he mostly understands what this world is like with the idea of mutants and humans. But as we get into the beginning of the storyline, we do pick up with a character known as Trinity. Now, when it comes to this character right here, she appeared earlier on in our coverage over the X-Men, right? And she has the ability to absorb the energy of people who are dying. Now, once she has absorbed that energy, she's then able to release that energy as a very powerful blast. And the problem was she wasn't really able to control that power. Now, thanks to Mr. Sinister, he found a way to technically help her to control her powers. Now, once he did that, as you all know, for Mr. Sinister, he technically owns you now. Now, you had her being able to escape. The problem was Sinister had sent the Marauders after her. Now, Nate Gray couldn't help her. And the reason why, because Nate Gray was dealing with the whole Onslaught crossover. Now, in reality, when they had arrived in New York, they were together, but she snuck away and got herself in more trouble. Now, when it came to her trying to deal with Marauders, she got saved by an unknown person. We were kind of left to figure out who in the world had saved her. And so when we jump into the opening pages of this storyline, we're learning who that person was. And that would be the Abomination. Now, for me personally, growing up, when it came to the Abomination, the only person I know who would fight against him would be the Hulk. And occasionally, like, other members of the Avengers. And that would be it. But when it comes to Abomination, he was the one who saved her when it came to her being chased down by, well, the Marauders. But we do learn here that there is some kind of connection between these two characters. But I kind of want to go ahead and switch back over to Nate Gray. And the reason why, because it's Nate Gray examining New York City, because he's truly amazed about the city. Because again, this does take place shortly after the whole idea of the Onslaught crossover. And so because of that, he's really amazed about the fact the city is being able to move on from the idea of being hit hard by Onslaught, but also losing their heroes, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, who are currently away right now because they're currently in the Heroes Reborn reality. But for Nate Gray, his main goal is to find his friend, Trinity. And so you do have Nate being able to, well, locate her, realizing that she's underground. But I kind of want to go ahead and switch over to, well, Abomination. Here's the reason why, because around this time in Marvel Comics, when it came to Abomination, you had Marvel trying to do something different with his character. And let me explain. You see, when it came to Abomination, he had his own group of people who lived in the sewers. Very similar to the Morlocks, but somewhat different. And let me explain, because the Morlocks were a group of people who were mutants who went into hiding in the tunnels. When it came to Abomination group, they're called the Forgotten. And there are superpower beings in his group, but it's a mixture of people who are humans, mutants, or possibly other kinds of people who all went into hiding and right now hiding out with Abomination. Now, when it comes to Trinity, she was part of this group in the past, but something happened in the past. And so it's Abomination telling her, like, you can't stay here. You gotta leave. And so while she's trying to leave and get some resources, she does grab this jacket. Now, apparently, this jacket is very special. It belonged to a guy known as Jimmy, one of the Forgottens who had died recently. And so she is attacked by a few people of the Forgotten. But then you have Nate Gray arrive. Now, right as soon as you have Nate Gray arrive, you have the Abomination begin to attack Nate Gray. And here's the reason why, because for Abomination, this is his territory. His main goal is to protect this area no matter what. And so, of course, he's right now very upset with Trinity. He's kind of like, look at you. You came back here after being gone for a long period of time, and now you brought some stranger here who's right now attacking the place. Now, for Trinity, what she does is try to distract Abomination long enough to allow Nate Gray to recover, which of course does not take that long. You have Nate Gray being able to bounce back just like that. And once he does bounce back, you have Nate being able to pin Abomination to the wall. Now, for the Abomination, he begins to warn Nate Gray, like, hey, listen, man, I don't know who you are, but I do know one thing. You can't trust her. And so this kind of begins the process of us learning, like, what is their past connection? What did Trinity do in the past to make Abomination hate her so much? And so we learn here that when it came to Trinity, when she was found by Abomination, he took her in and gave her food, gave her drinks, gave her a place to stay until she was able to fully recover. The problem was that there was an elderly couple nearby who was part of the Forgotten as well. And so when it came to the elderly couple, they were nearby her. When she woke up, she released her death energy, killing them off just like that. Let's not forget, when it came to Trinity, she had a hard time controlling her ability because she could feel when people were dying across the world. And she would absorb that death energy, but then release it. And so unfortunately, that elderly couple was killed off by her by mistake. But for Abomination, he felt like he was tricked by her to allow her to come and join them. And so ever since that day, he hated her. Now, for Nate Gray, he asked her, like, hey, listen, did you do it on purpose? She says no. And he's kind of like, okay, cool. But for the Abomination, he can't get past that. He's kind of like, no, you can't trust her. And for Nate Gray, he kind of realized that because, again, in our last video for X-Men, really the Onslaught crossover, Mr. Sinister said, hey, she was playing the entire time. She was working for me, allowing you to get close to me to allow me the chance to grab you. But it's Nate Gray kind of saying, like, you were kind of forced to do those things. Like, for example, the whole idea your powers not working properly, you had to go to him. But you also had to apologize for what you did to Abomination in the past. Now, for Abomination, he can't get past that. So he does attack Nate Gray. But the thing is, Nate Gray was able to play mind games on Abomination to make him think that he was beating down on Nate Gray, defeated Nate Gray, but Trinity got away. But in reality, none of that happened. And so now it's time for Nate and her to leave that place and kind of move on as a pair again. Now, let's not forget that we're picking up also with, well, Celine. And when it came to Celine, she has been going around recruiting different people for some unknown reason. Like, for example, Fitzroy, who comes from Bishop's future, but also Madeline Pryor. Now, we have no idea how in the world Madeline is currently alive again at this moment. But either way, for Madeline, she misses Nate Gray. She was with Nate Gray at the very beginning of this series, but she was taken away by Celine. And we have no idea why Celine took Madeline away. And for Madeline, she does not remember anything from her past really at this moment. And so this kind of leads us into the next chapter where we kind of get Nate Gray just hanging out with Trinity. And I kind of like this a lot because it's really more of him just trying to adjust to this reality. So currently right now, you do have the two characters at Washington State Park, if I remember correctly. But either way, while being at the park and them being able to build this bond with one another, they see this guy playing this card game with the public. Now, of course, it is a con game to get people's money, but you do have Nate Gray kind of remind us that he knows how to play card games from his old reality. So at first, you have Nate Gray just watching different people walk up and basically lose at the game. And matter of fact, every single time somebody makes the wrong move, he tells us like, that's a bad move. Nope, should have done that. Big mistake right there. But when it comes time for Nate Gray to play, Nate knows which card to choose. And technically over and over and over again, you have Nate Gray just beating this guy. And you have the guy say, you know what? Enough's enough. It's time for us to go ahead and pack up. Now for Nate, he also realized that there were some other people who were kind of involved in the whole con game. But either way, Nate Gray got it shut down. Now for Nate Gray, he kind of realized that this park is just full of different kinds of con people because he does see this palm reader. Now this palm reader is actually a college student right now. And when it comes to her being a college student, what she's doing is pretending to be a psychic as a way to collect money. But in reality, she's not a psychic. And so for Nate, he's kind of like, oh, I realize that you're faking it to earn money. Well, let me show you what a real psychic is like. And so you have Nate Gray reveal everything about her to the public to kind of show that he is a real psychic, but also you have Nate Gray showing off his skills by telling things about other people in the park as well. And so with Nate Gray doing that, you now have all these different people kind of wondering like, hey, can he help us out too? Like, can he tell us more about my girlfriend or like my job or like one of my best friends? And so you do have, Trinity trying to get all these different people to line up to have Nate Gray answer their questions, but Nate Gray pulls her away. Now, while they fly away, we do see that Madeline Pryor is there. And for Madeline, she's like, oh my God, it's Nate. And she has been wanting to see him for the longest time. But Nate Gray didn't realize that she was there. Now, while you have Madeline out there seeing Nate Gray, for Celine and Fitzroy, they're meeting up with, well, Tessa and of course, Sebastian Shaw. Now, we do have a Hellfire Club in America, and we did have a Hellfire Club in, well, London. But by this point in Marvel Comics, the Hellfire Club is kind of like in limbo. And so when it comes to Celine, what she wants to do is rebuild the inner circle to the Hellfire Club. And the main reason why? Because of Bastion. So it kind of shows that with Bastion kind of on the rise for Operation Zero Tolerance, you have everybody trying their best to get ready for that big major crossover between all the different X titles. And so you do have Sebastian kind of seem intrigued to make the new Hellfire Club. Now, the rest of this issue is really more of us just seeing Nate Gray hanging out with Trinity. Like, for example, they head over to the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller, and you do have me able to use Nate Gray abilities to pretend to be some like famous people. So of course, when they walk in, all these different people want to serve them. All these different people want to watch them. Like, it's Nate Gray really being able to spend some time with Trinity. And really, we're seeing this relationship bloom between the two characters. But while you do have the two characters being able to, dance and have fun, Nate Gray forgot that in this reality, humans are scared of mutants a whole lot. So he begins to float with her midair and everyone begins to freak out. And so you have Nate Gray leave. But while you do have Nate Gray leave, you do have him kind of head over to the top of the building. And it really shows that this is Nate Gray and also Trinity kind of being able to open up to one another. But you do have the book end on the note where they do kiss. And it's kind of like, okay, cool. Where can the storyline now go with these two characters being a couple for one another? Because let's not forget, Madeline Pryor's still out there. And Madeline was Nate Gray's first love interest in this reality. But with that being okay, so I kind of want to go ahead and get back into our coverage over X-Men Nate Gray because, like I said in our last video, when it comes to Nate Gray, it's really more of him trying to make a life for himself in this reality. Because in the first part of his run in the main Marvel universe prior to X-Men Onslaught, it was just him always on the run, just always doing things big, left and right, fighting against Excalibur, fighting against Cable, fighting against Charles Xavier. The dude fought against a lot of different people, but at the same time, it's completely understandable because he came from a different reality, better known as Age of Apocalypse. But with him now being in the main Marvel universe, it's really more of him now trying to adjust to the idea of being in this reality and trying to make a life for himself. But also, let's not forget that his powers are slowly killing him off. And so for Nate Gray, it's him wanting to have a life before he officially dies. But it's also Nate Gray still trying to be, well, a hero. Because for Nate Gray, he sees this building on fire, right? Now, with this building being on fire, it's supposedly an abandoned building. But in reality, you have addicts living in those buildings. And so even though they have been labeled abandoned, they're technically not. And so innocent people's lives right now are in danger at the moment. And so you have Nate Gray going out of his way to try to help out those people, which honestly he does. Now, for Nate, it's also him saying like, okay, cool. Let me find the person who had technically started that fire. It was an arsonist. And so you have Nate Gray go after that guy and kind of use his powers to give that guy his own taste of his medicine for what he has done, because those people no longer have a home. Like, yes, they're drug addicts, but at the same time, now their home has been completely burned down. Now, for Nate Gray, it's also him realizing, really his girlfriend realized this, that they need money. And so that kind of leads into Trinity, his girlfriend, trying to find the best way to make money. Where, of course, they use Nate powers to help out different people. And once he does help out those people, of course, they pay. Now, when it comes to the storyline, it does get a tad bit sad here because you do have this boy who has cancer, right? And I kind of feel like his mom brought him there to meet Nate Gray to find a way to hopefully get rid of his cancer. But it's really more of Nate Gray just giving her the strength she needs for this long journey that her and her son going on while he fights against cancer. Now, for Nate Gray, he kind of felt like there was somebody out there watching him, and technically he was right. But the thing is, we don't figure out who it is just yet because we now switch over to Bastion. Now, when it comes to Bastion, as we all know, he's the next big bad guy for the X-Men and the next big crossover, Operation Zero Tolerance. And so when it comes to Bastion, he's right now trying to find the different members of the Hellfire Club. And when it comes to our earlier videos for our coverage or the X-Men, we had saw different people begin to pop up to make a brand new inner circle for the American branch of the Hellfire Club. And so for Bastion, his main goal is to hopefully find them. Now, as we do switch back over to Nate Gray and also Trinity, it's really more of Nate Gray kind of done for the day helping out people. And the reason why, because he kind of want to focus more on Trinity. Because for her, he wants to know like, okay, I have some unanswered questions about you. But at the same time, it's him wanting to know like, what is their official status at the moment? Like, are they actually a couple? And so for Nate Gray, he kind of want to figure out those things out, but also he kind of feels like with her being in his life, it's now a start of a new life for him, a better life for him. And so he wants some alone time with her. But while you have that going on, literally as you have Nate Gray and Trinity fly over this ship, on that ship, we see the different members of the Hellfire Club coming together. So, of course, that'll be Sebastian Shaw, that'll be Tessa, Fitzroy, and also, of course, Celine. Now, you also have Madeline Pryor there as well. And you had this book trying to hide the fact that it's Madeline Pryor, but we saw in prior videos it's her. But the idea of her being there is very interesting to Sebastian Shaw. And you see what I mean here in a moment. But for a brief moment, I kind of want to jump back over to Nate Gray. And the reason why, because you have Nate kind of learning that, okay, if you want to have a life in this reality and be a better person, then you have to do things in a better way. Meaning that you can no longer try to steal stuff with your powers. And so you have Trinity force Nate Gray to go inside and use the cash he made by helping out people to buy the boots that he saw in the store. Now, getting back over to the different members of the Hellfire Club, you had these different members right now, really Sebastian Shaw, kind of wondering like who Celine brought with her. Like, yes, it's Fitzroy, but also this redhead, of course, being Madeline Pryor. But for Sebastian at first, he doesn't care for Madeline. But you then have Sebastian and Tessa take a hard look at Madeline Pryor and kind of realize who she is. Because for Sebastian, he saw the inferno in her eyes. And so with that, he's kind of like, oh, you are something special that could possibly help us down the road. But to them, it kind of means that they now have the ability to get their hands on the X-Men with Madeline Pryor in their grasp. But we do switch over to Nate Gray and also Trinity. Now, for these two characters, they just got done shopping, right? And so for Nate and her, they kind of realize they don't have a place to stay at the moment. And so you have the two characters move into this vacant apartment. Now, it's not like it was Nate signing a lease. It's right now him saying like, I will use my powers to hide the fact that we're inside this place right now. But it's Nate saying like, don't worry. Sooner or later, I'm going to do better things for us. But at the same time, I still want to know more about you. It's because what he heard from Mr. Sinister, because while in the middle of the whole X-Men Onslaught crossover, Mr. Sinister basically told Nate Gray, like, listen, she's always playing the game. Like, yes, it may seem like she does care for you, but in reality, like, nah, man, she always has some kind of agenda. And so that's why he says, I need to know everything about you. And so as we get into the next chapter, it's really more of us now picking up with, well, Nate Gray watching television. Now, it's kind of cool to see him experiencing TV for the first time, but it's also Nate Gray kind of showing us that between the chapters, him and Trinity, they had that conversation, right? And when it came to that conversation, it was really more of him kind of realizing that there is that possibility that she's still being controlled by Mr. Sinister, because it was Mr. Sinister who had technically helped her to control her abilities, but it's also Nate saying like, there's a possibility the idea of you falling in love with me or me falling in love with you is part of his plan. And so the whole idea of the possibility of them being played by Mr. Sinister is just lingering over them. He's truly afraid of the possibility of being played by him. And so now for Nate Gray and Trinity, their whole entire brand new relationship is beginning to fall apart. Now, the middle part of this storyline or this chapter, it's really more of us just seeing Madeline Pryor trying to prove to the higher ranking members of the inner circle of the Hellfire Club that she can handle her own. And so they have Madeline Pryor fighting against Scribe. Now, when it comes to Scribe, we met her over in Excalibur because she was part of the London branch of Excalibur. Over there, she was the Red Scribe. Now, with that being said, when it comes to Scribe, we have to remember that she was being possessed by a character known as Mountjoy, who comes from the same future as Fitzroy and also Bishop. Bishop. Now, when it comes to Mountjoy, he has the ability to merge with other people, but to control their bodies and over time kind of consume their bodies as well. But anyways, for Mountjoy, it's him still pretending to be Scribe. But either way, as the fight goes on, at first, for Madeline Pryor, she does struggle. But you do have Madeline being able to bounce back and being able to defeat Mountjoy by literally pulling him out of Scribe, which honestly kind of shows how powerful she truly is. But with her doing that, it shows the rest of the inner circle that she's somebody they can have with them. Now, we do kind of switch back over to Nate Gray. And when we do, it's really more of Nate Gray kind of realizing that somebody has entered his apartment. And that somebody would be no other than Bishop. Now, when it comes to Bishop, the reason why he is there is to actually talk to Nate Gray, not to fight against him. But of course, for Bishop, he's not really good at talking to other people when it comes to handling different things. But either way, when it comes to Bishop, he does try to tell Nate that he's kind of impressed that Nate was able to realize that Bishop was in the room. Because Bishop, he made sure to bring a lot of different tech to go undetected, but unfortunately, it didn't work. Now, you do have Nate Gray try to punch Bishop, but the thing, not punch, try to use his powers on Bishop. But the thing is, for Bishop, he's able to absorb kinetic energy. And so once he does that, he's then able to release that kinetic energy right back at you. And so you have Bishop being able to use that kinetic energy he absorbed on Nate Gray, where it does kind of make Nate Gray even more mad. But you do have the two characters go out the window. And they do get saved by Rogue. Now, when it comes to Rogue, she's that person to calm everybody down. But for Rogue, it's really more of her saying like, hey, listen, the reason why we came here is to have Bishop talk to you. Because Bishop is actually concerned for Nate Gray. Because for Bishop, he also lived in the age of apocalypse reality alongside with Nate Gray. And so he kind of understands the life that Nate Gray had in that reality. And so it's Bishop saying like, hey man, listen, I get the idea you wanted to adjust and live a life in this brand new reality. But what you're doing right now, going out of your way to use your powers to make money by helping people, is kind of concerning. But also you are pulling a lot of attention at yourself right at the moment. And technically Bishop is right, because again, this is post-onslaught. And so post-onslaught right now, when it comes to humans and mutants, there's a lot of bad blood at the moment. And so it's Bishop saying like, you doing that right there is putting more eyes on you. And with you doing that, that could lead to more problems down the road. Now, you do have Rogue and Bishop lead, but you have Rogue kind of established that even though Nate Gray does not trust the X-Men, is Rogue saying like, not all the X-Men are the same. Like, yes, we all have similar goals. We all think differently. And so for Rogue, it's her saying like, you can't judge everybody because you saw Bishop here or possibly Charles Xavier. Like, we're all different. We all had the same goals. But we all want to achieve those goals in different ways. But the book does kind of end on the note where you have Nate Gray just go back into his apartment. The problem is, it does seem like he just went into a different reality. Well, the problem is, this reality he went to is the age of apocalypse reality. Somehow, in some crazy way, Nate Gray has gone officially back home. But this is where we're I always felt like there's a chance of us going back into the age of apocalypse reality. But for me personally, I thought it will be later stories down the road, like many stories down the road before we're able to officially dive back into this reality. But then I forgot there's Nate Gray. And with Nate Gray being there, there's a possibility of us going back into that reality a bunch of times. Like, for example, X-Men Annual 96. With this annual right here, it's Nate Gray going back to his home reality for the first time. Because at the end of our last video, when it came to X-Men, he was having a conversation with Rogue and also Bishop. The problem was that when he tried to go back to his apartment, there were these ripples in time that appeared out of nowhere. So for a brief moment, for Nate Gray, He went back home to the age of Apocalypse reality, then back to the main Marvel Universe reality. And so for Nate, he's kind of like, what in the world was that? I got to figure that stuff out. And so as we get into the opening pages of this storyline, because it's Nate Gray right now trying to figure out like what is the actual cause for these ripples in times that's happening all over the world. And matter of fact, when it comes to Nate Gray, when it does seem like he's getting closer and closer to the actual location or the actual reason behind it, he'll see different parts of the age of Apocalypse reality appear in front of him and be very confused about the idea of why in the world he's now being able to see his old reality. Now, let's not forget that when it came to the age of Apocalypse reality, we were kind of left to believe that reality died. When you had Bishop go back in time to make sure that Charles Xavier did not die, then basically that reality no longer existed. Now, you did have 4 characters being able to come back over to the main Marvel Universe: Dark Beast, Sugar Man, Holocaust, and also Nate Gray. And the last 2 are really important: Sugar Man and also Nate Gray. And here's the reason why. Because the Sugar Man is responsible for what's happening right now when it comes to these ripples in time. Now, the Sugar Man, as we all know, is from the age of Apocalypse reality. So what he wants to do right now is go back home, but to an earlier point in time. And the reason why? To get one of Apocalypse diseases, to kind of work on it, make it better, then bring it back to the main Marvel Universe and release it into this world right here. Now, when it comes to Sugar Man, we also have to remember that he is responsible for Genosha. You see, we had learned early on that when it came to Genosha, it was this beautiful country. They had no issues at all. But in reality, they had a lot of issues. What they were doing is using mutants as slaves to kind of help build up their country. Now, of course, by this point in time, you're having the mutants fight against the humans in that country, basically a civil war. But it was the Sugar Man who gave the scientists the ability to turn mutants into slaves. Now, the Sugar Man right now is using a few mutates to kind of help power up his gateway that will lead him back into the age of Apocalypse reality. Now, some of his security guards warn him that somebody is coming, and that somebody is, well, Nate Gray. Now, when it comes to Nate Gray, this man is pumping out a lot of psi energy. And for the Sugar Man, that is perfect. And the reason why, because while you have Nate Gray fighting against the security guards who are working for Sugar Man, but also trying to free the prisoners of the Sugar Man is using the energy that Nate Gray is pumping out to help power up his gateway. So by the time you have Nate Gray realize what's going on, it's too late. The Sugar Man had already used a gateway to go back to the age of Apocalypse reality. And so for Nate, he knows he must follow Sugar Man to basically stop him. So you also have Nate Gray go through the gate and of course head back home to the age of Apocalypse reality. Now, once you have Nate Gray arrive in the old reality of his, he's then confronted by Magneto. Now, again, this storyline does take place in the past. So with that idea, Magneto has not formed the X-Men yet. But once you do have Magneto use his powers to pull Nate Gray out of the water, you have Nate realize, okay, cool, I'm now back home. I'm now back in the age of Apocalypse reality. This is great, but at the same time, I gotta find Sugar Man. Now, for Nate Gray, he's kind of confused on how in the world Magneto is able to move his body, but once you have Nate Gray kind of show off his ability, he kind of got 2 high-head characters kind of getting mad at one another. But you didn't have Forge appear. And we kind of have to remember that this is in the past again, because in the present day of this reality, Forge died. And so with the idea of Forge being alive again, this is great for Nate Gray, because for Nate Gray, he looked at Forge as his father figure. Now, once you do have the 2 guys hug it out, and once you have Nate kind of realize that he's in the past at the moment, you also have Nate trying his best to explain everything of what's happening right now with him coming back to this reality to find Sugar Man. The thing is, Forge already knows what Nate Gray needs to do in this mission of his, because apparently a future version of Nate Gray has traveled back in time to an earlier point and told Forge everything. But as we do switch over to the Sugar Man, we're now seeing the Sugar Man at the moment at his lab right now, working on his brand new experiment, trying to turn Apocalypse Virus into a better version of itself. But while you have basically Sugar Man doing that, you also learn that one of his prisoners is Jason Wingard. And so you're going to have Sugar Man try to use his brand new virus on Jason to see if it could possibly work, or what is the actual outcome of his virus once someone gets it. Now we do kind of switch back over to Nate Gray and Forge, right? Now for Forge, it's him telling Nate Gray why he never told Nate about the idea of meeting an older version of Nate Gray, because this older version of Nate told Forge like, hey, listen, you may never tell my younger self anything about us meeting at all technically until like this exact moment. And so that is why Forge never told Nate Gray anything at all while growing up with Forge. But here's the thing, because for Forge, it's also him telling Nate like, hey, listen, I know that in the other reality, you met a man known as Charles Xavier. That man right there is the reason why that world did not become like ours. Because for Nate Gray, he kind of hates Charles Xavier, because for Charles and really Magneto as well, it led into Onslaught and the idea that the Fantastic Four and the Avengers are supposedly dead. Now, in reality, they're not. They're currently in the Heroes Reborn reality. But for Nate Gray, it's kind of like, no, the age of heroes died in that reality because of Charles. But it's Forge saying like, no, you don't understand. Charles Xavier is the reason why that world did not get so dark like ours. Now, your future self also told me when we're supposed to attack. Technically, we have a guy in the inside of Sugar Man's lab. But for Nate Gray, it's him kind of wondering like, what should be his next move here? Because for Nate Gray, he made a life for himself in the other reality, better known as the main Marvel universe, where he had fallen in love twice. There is Trinity. There's also Madeline Pryor. But in this reality, his home reality, there's Teresa, Siren of this reality, who he had fallen in love with prior to going into the main Marvel universe. And so for Nate, he's kind of wondering if he should stay here, because with him now being in the past, only at the dawn of Apocalypse, with the power he has, he can stop Apocalypse and save this world from getting so dark and, well, horrible. But as we do switch back over to Sugar Man, we see Sugar Man about to give Jason this modified version of Apocalypse Virus to Jason. And so you now have the Inside Man make his move because he believes that Jason is going to die. And that would be Morph. So we get the idea that Morph was always working alongside with Forge and Magneto far in the past in the age of Apocalypse reality. But either way, you have Morph trying his best to protect Jason. The problem is that when it comes to Jason, he has the ability to play with your mind, to make you see things, taste things, hear things, feel things, anything he wants you to do, basically, when it comes to your five senses. And so for Morph, at first, he believed the Sugar Man had gave Jason the virus. But in reality, Jason, better known as Mastermind, did not get the virus yet. But then at the very last second, help arrives. That would be Nate Gray, Magneto, and also Forge. Now, when the heroes arrive, of course, their main goal is to help out Morph, but to also help out Jason Wingard as well. But you also have our heroes trying their best to stop Sugar Man's plan. Now, when it comes to Forge, he begins to get a tad bit worried about the actual future. And the reason why, because, okay, when it comes to Forge, he's kind of wondering if Nate Gray has the ability to stop Sugar Man. Because for Sugar Man, what he did was, like I said earlier, create a brand new virus. Not a brand new virus, but a better version of Apocalypse virus. But here's the thing. It's waterborne. So right now it's in the water. And so you have Forge tell Nate Gray what he has to do. It's foretelling Nate Gray that he has to pull the virus out of the water and then kind of collect the different virus particles, put it into a ball. Then Magneto will have the ability to surround the particles into a metal ball and take it away somewhere cold to allow the virus to die. But this right here is going to push Nate Gray powers to his limit. And the reason why, because it's Nate Gray having to locate every single part of the actual virus that's in the water right now and then pull out the virus out of the water. And so for Nate, it's pushing his powers to his limit, but it really shows how powerful he truly is. Now, you do have Nate being able to do it. You then have Magneto trap the virus and takes it away. Now, while you had Nate Gray doing that, you also have Magneto set up a portal that leads back into the main Marvel universe. And this kind of leads into a very quick ending, because once you have Nate Gray trying to rest, it's for saying like, you gotta go back home. You gotta go back to the main Marvel universe. But Nate wants to stay because Nate wants to make this world a better place. But the thing is, Forge knows they can't mess with time like that. Like, time has to continue the way it was already set to continue. And so, unfortunately, Nate has to go back. But Forge realized this would be a hard discussion with Nate. And so what Forge did was he told Jason, make it seem like Magneto was going to attack Forge. But in reality, it was just an illusion. To have Nate Gray use his powers, and with his powers being activated, it also powers up the gate back home. And so you have the Sugar Man and Nate Gray go back to the main Marvel universe. And just like that, we're now back into the old reality. But with that, you know, I kind of love the idea of us covering different X-Men events, and I really can't wait to get into Operation Zero Tolerance. But as we all know, we got to work our way up to it, right? Because we got a lot of storylines to cover that lead into the actual event. Like, for example, the idea of Nate Gray meeting Peter Parker, Spider-Man. Like, for me personally, this is kind of weird. Like, good storyline, but kind of out of nowhere. For me personally, I would never think like, what would it be like if Nate Gray met Peter Parker? Like, how that whole thing go down? And the thing is, we got a 2-part storyline that kind of shows us what it's like for Nate Gray to meet Peter Parker. Now, there are a few things we need to know about before we officially dive into the storyline, but for the Spider-Man side, because as we all know right now, we're currently doing this massive X-Men reading order. But when it came to this storyline, it does take place after the Clone Saga, so Ben Reilly died. Unfortunately for Mary Jane Peter Parker, they lost their baby as well, and also Aunt May died as well. So like, a lot of things happen in the 1990s for Spider-Man, but when it comes to the Kingpin, he's no longer around either. And so with the Kingpin no longer being around, you have different people trying to replace him. Like, for example, you have a guy out there known as Black Tarantula. Now, for Black Tarantula, he's trying his best to make a footing in New York. And so what he did was he sent one of his guys up there to begin the process, better known as El Uno. Now, when it came to El Uno, he ran into another group out there that's being run by the New Rose. Now, when it came to the New Rose, well, he sent out his minion, better known as Delia. And so she was able to, beat El Uno. He got arrested, but as we get into the opening pages of this storyline, El Uno had escaped police custody and now trying his best to get revenge. Now, when it comes to Nate Gray around this time in Marvel Comics, it was him trying his best to make a life for himself. Because for Nate Gray, as we all know, the dude came from the age of apocalypse reality. And so for Nate, with him now being the main Marvel universe, it's just him trying to adjust to this reality. And so he's trying to use his powers to help out other people by reading their minds to kind of figure out what is their actual struggles and how can he help them. And so for Peter Parker, he got word about Nate Gray because Nate Gray is getting really popular in the area. So for the Daily Bugle, they want some pictures of Nate doing what he does at the park, which is helping people out. Now for Nate, he does see Peter Parker and he read the mind of Peter, knowing that who he is, what he can do, and also why he is there for. And so you have Nate ask Peter to go somewhere else quietly. But this is really more of Peter Parker trying to teach Nate Gray how to be more responsible when it comes to his powers. Let me explain. Because for Nate Gray, he quickly does use his powers to hide him and Peter in the crowd of people. Then once again, he used his powers to take them over to a nearby building. And then literally right after that, you have Nate Gray use his powers again to get rid of the clothes that Peter Parker was wearing, to no longer hide the fact that the dude is Spider-Man. And so is Peter saying, have you lost your mind? Like, here you are right now just using your powers just out in the open. Like, dude, you gotta be more responsible. Now, as we all know, this is Peter Parker gonna do the whole with great power comes great responsibility lesson that he had learned from Uncle Ben. Thinking that for Nate Gray, he does not understand how to be more responsible when it comes to his powers. But this is more of Peter Parker and Nate Gray kind of realizing that they're kind of alike with one another. Because for Peter Parker, as we all know, he had Uncle Ben who taught him with great power comes great responsibility. And at first, for Peter, he feels like that Nate does not understand that. But it's Nate saying like, no, I had my Uncle Ben. He died, and he's talking about his version of Forge from his reality, who was basically like his father. When Forge died, he's saying, that's when I realized with my great power comes great responsibility. And he used that great power to fight against Apocalypse in his reality to defeat Apocalypse in that reality. Now, technically for me, once he did come over to the main Marvel universe, he was a tad bit reckless, fighting against all these different X characters for no good actual reason to me personally. But either way, it's Peter and Nate kind of realizing that they're alike. And so you have Peter say, you know what? Come with me. And so what Peter did next was he took Nate Gray over to their home with Mary Jane and Aunt Anna, where they were able to have a Christmas dinner with one another. And I kind of like this a lot. But while you have those, four people being able to sit down with one another to have this Christmas dinner, where you do have Peter Parker and Nate Gray being able to build that bond with one another, well, you have El Uno going after Delilah. And so you do have those two characters fight against one another, but you do have El Uno lose that battle very easily. And so, of course, you're going to have Delilah, had a hard time saying that, sent the head of El Uno back to his boss, which, of course, is the Black Tarantula. And so now we have to shift over to X-Men issue number 24. And when we do, we pick up with a character known as Trinity. Now, for Trinity, around this time in Marvel Comics, she was known as the lover to Nate Gray. But around this time, they also had a fallout. So, of course, she's kind of being sad and depressed at the moment. And we see her walking around the terminal cancer ward at the Empire State Hospital. And the reason why, because when it comes to her ability, let's not forget here that she can absorb the energy of people who are dying and then use that energy as a way to release a blast. She also has the ability to kind of speed up someone's death. So if they're dying, she can go ahead and kind of help them on their way. So it's her just walking through this cancer ward, just killing off people left and right. And the reason why, because she's depressed about losing Nate Gray. And just in case we have anybody joining our coverage over this series, I will explain why her and Nate Gray had a fallout here in a moment. But we do shift over to Peter Parker, Mary Jane, and Aunt Anna. While you do have all three characters being able to spend Christmas with one another. Now for Peter Parker, this is pretty hard because yes, they lost a baby, but also they lost Aunt May as well. So This is their first Christmas without Aunt May being around. But you also have Peter's spider sense go off and realize that there's somebody hiding in a neighbor's basement. And so you have Peter head over there to see what in the world is currently going on. And that is when you have Peter find Nate Gray. Now, for Nate Gray, it does seem like he was recently attacked by a vampire. And the reason why, because it does look like he's turning into one. Well, technically, he was attacked by one, Morbius, the living vampire. Now, for Peter, he does inform us, the readers, but also Nate Gray, that when it comes to Morbius, yes, he may drink blood, but like, he does not create other vampires at all, because he's not your usual supernatural vampire. But somehow Nate Gray is slowly turning into a vampire, it seems like. Now, technically, it could be because when Morbius had bit Nate Gray, it kind of builds some kind of mind connection thanks to Nate Gray's powers. Either way, for Nate, he right now wants to find Trinity. And so for Peter, he agrees to help Nate Gray out. Now, I kind of want to shift back over to the Hellfire Club, and here's the reason why. Because in an earlier storyline that we did not cover, and the reason why, because the backup story in the annual, and honestly like 2 pages long, and that is it. When it came to Madeline Pryor, she was attacked by Tessa. And with her being attacked by Tessa, it basically helped her remember things from her past. Like, for example, Scott Summers, the X-Men, being a clone of Jean Grey, Mr. Sinister, but especially the idea that she had a child, better known as Cable. And so it's her now beginning to remember things from her past. Now, I kind of want to go ahead and shift back over to Trinity to explain like what's going on with her character, like why her and Nate Gray have issues at the moment. You see, when it comes to Trinity, she was working for Mr. Sinister. Now, she was able to escape from him, but when it came to Mr. Sinister being able to capture Nate Gray, he put the idea in his mind that there's a possibility that Trinity is still working for Mr. Sinister, which means that even though Nate Gray does have feelings for her, it's still a possibility it's all fake. Like, the whole idea of their relationship, because she could be working for Mr. Sinister. Now, she has been trying her best to prove it, but every single time they get close enough to being happy, that gets brought up again. And so it's her just kind of running away from her problems and not really trying to work things out with Nate Gray. And the same thing goes for him as well. Now, that is when you have Morbius confront Trinity. Here's the reason why, because when it came to Morbius, when he bit Nate Gray earlier, it kind of built some kind of connection. And so with that connection, it allowed Morbius to understand that Nate Gray has strong feelings for Trinity. And so with those strong feelings, you have Morbius go find her, which he did. Now, when he did find her, he kind of realized she's also facing problems like he is. Very similar. The whole idea of the hunger. Like, she has to feed off energy of the dead while he needs blood to survive. And so it's him saying like, Nate Gray can truly never understand what you're going through. But you do have Nate Gray and also Spider-Man being able to find Trinity and Morbius. We do have the 4 characters kind of fight here, but in the middle of the battle, you have Nate Gray being able to push out Morbius influences. So now he's turning back to normal. But you do have Morbius run away, and you do have Spider-Man go chase after him. Now, technically, the story does continue on in a 3rd chapter when it comes to Spider-Man chasing down Morbius, and we're not going to cover that issue right there. But when it comes to Trinity and Nate Gray, they now have a chance to talk to one another. And really, their conversation is very short here. And the reason why, because once you have Nate Gray turn back to normal, it's really more of Nate Gray kind of informing Trinity that he knows what she has been up to. Like, hey, I know that you've been going around killing golf people who've been on the verge of dying. You know, they have cancer or some other kind of disease. But for Nate Gray, it's still not okay. Now, it's also the fact that for a brief moment, it did seem like she was happy to be with Morbius. And the reason why, because he understands what she's going through, the whole idea of the hunger. But it's Nate Gray saying like, I can help you, but you need to choose for yourself if you want that help or you don't want that help. And so you have Nate Gray leave. Now, right after he does leave, that is when you have Madeline Pryor appear. And when Madeline Pryor does appear, it's kind of like, okay, where could this possibly go next? But okay, so it's time for us to go ahead and get back into our coverage over, well, X-Man. And we do pick up with issue number 25. Now, here's the thing about this issue right here, because this is Jean Grey versus Madeline Pryor, but like round two, but also involving Nate Gray as well, because in our earlier videos, we had discussed the idea that Madeline Pryor now knows about her past, like the whole idea of Jean Grey, Mr. Sinister, Scott Summers, but also being a clone of Jean Grey. Oh, and let's not forget the idea that she had a child with Cyclops, better known as Cable. And so at the end of our last video for Nate Gray, after he had left the cemetery, after he left Trinity behind, his current lover, well, she was confronted by Madeline Pryor. Now, this is also like the first time Trinity and Madeline Pryor are meeting one another. So, of course, when they do be confronted by each other, for Trinity, she does know about Madeline Pryor. And the reason why, because she used to work for Mr. Sinister. And while kind of looking into his database, she was able to learn almost everything about Madeline Pryor because that man created her. But for Madeline, this is her first time meeting Trinity. Now, for Trinity, she does leave because her main goal is to find Nate Gray. The problem is that while she's trying to walk away, that is when you have Madeline ask, oh, wait, Nate was here. Now we have to get Jean Grey involved in the storyline. Now for Jean Grey, she's currently at home with Cyclops. And the thing is, she's confronted by Sanctity. Now, her real name is Tanya Trask, and she is the daughter to Bolivar Trask, the man who created the Sentinels. Now here's the thing, because for Tanya, she's a mutant. The thing is, she has the ability to time travel. So she fell into the far future where she met the Ascani clan, of course, a clan that helped raise Cable. But when it came to Tanya, while being there with Mother Ascani, better known as Rachel Summers, she was able to work her way up in the ranking of the actual clan. The thing is, she knows Cyclops and Jean Grey from a different storyline that we have not covered yet. But it's her saying like, hey, listen, you gotta wake up because one, you got Nate Gray out there. And when it comes to the Ascani clan, they kind of feel like Nate Gray should go. And the reason why, because he's an error in his timeline. He's a copy of Cable, technically, from a different timeline, who should not even be here. But it's also her kind of warning Jean Grey about Madeline Pryor. Now, I kind of want to shift over to Nate Gray, X-Man, and here's the reason why. Because for Nate Gray, let's not forget that technically he has two lovers in this reality. There's one more in a different reality. But the two lovers he had in this reality is Madeline Pryor and also Trinity. Now, for Madeline, she was the first one he met when he first arrived in this reality. But back then, for Madeline, she had no idea about her past. So unfortunately, she could not tell Nate Gray much about her. Now, the second lover is, of course, Trinity. And for her, she used to work for Mr. Sinister until she was able to break away from him and get with Nate Gray. The problem is that Nate Gray feels like that in some kind of weird way, she might be working for Mr. Sinister. But on top of that, he hates the idea that sometimes for Trinity, she has this hunger to kill people because when it comes to her powers, she can absorb the energy of people who are dying and turn that energy into a blast. And the thing is, she has that hunger to absorb that type of energy. And so for Nate, is him kind of wondering like, okay, what should he do with his love life? But let's go ahead and shift back over to the ladies. Now, when it comes to Trinity, like I said earlier, she knows almost everything about Madeline Pryor. The whole idea of her past, how she was created by Mr. Sinister. And so she tells Madeline like, hey, listen, I know everything about you. Now, when it comes to Trinity, remember that she can sense the death energy of people who are currently dying or possibly dead. And so when it comes to Madeline, she's like, oh, you are not alive. You are dead. that can't be right. But as soon as she says that, that right there freaks out Madeline Pryor. Because for Madeline Pryor to hear the idea that, oh, I'm dead is not right to her. She can breathe, she can think, she can feel, she can see. And technically, those things right there means that, yeah, she's alive. She's not dead. And so for Madeline, she begins to freak out and call Trinity a freak. Because in her mindset, look what you're wearing right now on your head. Those devices that was given to you by Mr. Sinister. Because remember, for a Trinity, she can't control her powers. She needs those devices to help her control her powers. Because if she doesn't, she'll just absorb random death energy out of nowhere and not be able to contain it and then release as a blast that could possibly hurt other people down the road. Now, once you have Madeline take her out and you have Madeline leave, you have two other guys kind of feel her presence. The first one would be Cable, her actual son. The other one, that would be Havoc, her lover right after Scott Summers. Now, after Madeline kind of flies away from Trinity, for Madeline, it's just her now being flooded with different things that she had forgotten from her past. The whole idea of being a clone from Jean Grey, being birthed by Mr. Sinister, meeting Scott Summers, getting married to Scott Summers, having a child with Scott, but then losing her husband and losing her child to Jean Grey, and then she died. It's all coming to her all at once. It's just too much for her to possibly handle all at once. And so she does pass out. But once she does wake back up, she's then confronted by Nate Grey. Now, this is the first time these two characters have seen each other since like the early days of this series, because right after you had Nate Grey arrive in this reality, he met her, but then she disappeared because Celine took her away. And for Nate Grey, he had no idea where she was at. But with these two being able to reunite with one another and being able to kiss, it does seem like at first, like, okay, you know, they might get the chance to have some time with one another. But then Jean Grey arrives on the Blackbird. Now, for Nate Grey, he does not really know about the past of Madeline Pryor. So the whole idea of seeing Madeline being able to bring down the Blackbird, he's kind of wondering like, why is Madeline attacking an X-Men for, especially someone like Jean Grey, who for me personally seems like a nice person? This is kind of weird. Now, at the same time, for Nate Grey, he's also kind of like, against the X-Men, because for him, with him coming from the age of apocalypse reality and seeing the dark side of what happens when a mutant takes over the world, the whole idea of the X-Men fighting for the dream of Charles Xavier, where mutants and humans are able to live together in harmony, seems kind of like a reach to him. And so for Nate Grey, he also kind of hates the X-Men because of what happened when it came to the Onslaught crossover. Now, it's not really him saying like, I don't like you guys at all, but for him, he wants to be left alone, especially when it comes to him and his friends like Trinity and also Madeline Pryor. But it's also Jean Grey being like, you don't understand though. Now, for Madeline Pryor, as we all know, she hates Jean Grey for what she has technically done to her. You know, to her mindset, oh, Jean Grey, here you came back into my life. You took my husband away. You took my son away. Like, it's truly not fair. Now, she does not say it out loud, but for Nate Grey, the dude wants some answers. He's like, listen, I just watched you go 0 to 100 real quick on Jean Grey, and I have no idea why. But once you have Nate Grey begin to question Madeline, that ticks her off, because she feels like the whole idea of Nate Grey questioning her is kind of like him not trusting her. It's kind of like he's now on the side of the X-Men. And so with her getting upset, we're seeing that her powers are beginning to go a tad bit, wild again. Now, you have Nate Grey try his best to shield them all from her abilities at the moment. But you have Jean Grey remind us that for Nate Grey, that his powers are technically killing him. You see, when it came to Mr. Sinister over in the other reality, better known as Age of Apocalypse, he made sure to kind of put that in as a failsafe because he made Nate Gray to take down Apocalypse, but he had to make sure that if Nate Gray did kill off Apocalypse, that Nate Gray would not come back to kill him. And so he put that failsafe in, like, hey, listen, your powers are going to kill you very soon the more often you use it. And so for Nate, with him trying to hold Madeline, but also protect him and Jean Grey as well, it's really doing a number to him at the moment. Now, it's Jean Grey also saying, like, Nate, we have to like go into her mind to figure out what she is, because that's the thing. Madeline should be dead. She died back in X-Men Inferno. How in the world is she here right now? But at the same time, it will allow Nate Gray to kind of get some answers about Madeline. And really, when it comes to Nate Gray and also Jean Grey, when they look into the mind of Madeline, they discover almost everything about her. And this is really huge because for Nate Gray and Jean Grey, they kind of figure out like, okay, how in the world is this woman right now alive again after she had died supposedly back in X-Men Inferno? And we kind of find out Nate Gray created her. You heard that right. Nate Gray is the reason why Madeline Pryor is here at the moment. Because when it came to Nate Gray, when he arrived in the main Marvel universe, he reached out for Jean Grey. And the reason why, because he wanted a Jean Grey like the one he had back from his reality, the Age of Apocalypse reality. And so unfortunately, when he came over here to the main Marvel universe, reaching out to our Jean Grey, he discovered Madeline Pryor on accident and technically created her. Like, he psionically created Madeline Pryor. She's just a shell of a person technically. And the reason why, because he wanted someone like Jean Grey. And unfortunately, he got Madeline. And so once he had discovered that, to him, Madeline gotta go. Now for Jean Grey, she does try to stop him, but she can't. And you then have Madeline get very upset. Because for Madeline, they're hitting her at her core. Like, you keep calling her a corpse. You keep calling her a dead person. And the thing is, she, in her mindset, to most people, she was never real because she was a clone of Jean Grey. But to her, she is her own person. She has her own heart, her own feelings, her own emotions. Like, everything about her is her own. It's not really Jean Grey. And that's the thing. And so once you have Madeline realize that Nate is trying to get rid of her, you have Madeline give Nate his power back right at him, and then she leaves. Now, this has a major outcome here. And the reason why, because right after you have Madeline leave, Madeline goes over to Hong Kong to be with Sebastian, because around this time, Marvel Comics, well, she was helping out reforming the Hellfire Club in the American branch. So her, Sebastian, Tessa, you also got Fitzroy and Celine, but she does join Sebastian in his bed. So of course, we get the idea that those two are now becoming lovers. But for Nate Gray, the real biggest outcome of the storyline is that he lost half of his abilities once Madeline Pryor kind of gave his powers back to him. And so for Nate Gray, he's no longer able to use telekinesis anymore. He still is a telepath, but that's really it. And so now the question is, what's next for Nate Gray without the idea of having half of his powers to use out there in the world? But with that being said, guys, this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later. Okay, so it's time for us to go ahead and get back into our coverage over X-Men. Now, this might be a long video because we're going to go ahead and cover the last 4 issues we need to cover before we're able to move on to the next X-team we have to talk about when it comes to our coverage over the X-Men leading into Operation Zero Tolerance. But this storyline does pick up where our last video had technically left off at when it comes to Nate Gray. The whole idea that out of nowhere, he had lost half of his abilities. So he's no longer able to use his telekinetic abilities anymore. He's still a telepath, but that's all he has left at the moment. And so for Nate Gray, it's him right now trying to look for answers. And so he's heading over to Muir Island to meet up with Moira McTaggart, kind of hoping that when it comes to Moira McTaggart, she might be able to really help him figure out what's going on with his abilities. Now, of course, without the idea of him being telekinesis anymore, he now has to travel by a boat without flying over to the island. So for Nate Gray, this is a tad bit different. It's an actual struggle, but it's also him wanting to sneak onto the island, sneak into the lab of Moira McTaggart, because the last time he came here, he fought against Excalibur. So it's him want to make sure to avoid the fighting. Now, for me personally, I kind of feel like you could have done that by just calling her. But this kind of leads into a flashback because we do pick up with Nate Gray at the Daily Bugle meeting up with Peter Parker. Now, this is a callback to the idea that in an earlier storyline, you have Peter and Nate being able to establish a friendship with one another. Now, with them doing that, it's also Nate Gray coming to Peter for answers. Now, for Nate Gray, he's there in his astral form. Nate Gray is really currently in Switzerland in this flashback because in our earlier video, he dealt with Madeline Pryor across the world. And so it's him being able to send an astral form across the world to at least talk to Peter Parker to kind of get an idea of what he should do when it comes to his missing powers. Now, this flashback is really more of Peter Parker telling Nate Gray, like, you need to go somebody who's in the X family who can possibly help you. If you don't like the X-Men and you can't go to X-Force because they have heavy connections right now with the X-Men, and the same thing goes for X-Factor, then you need to go see Moira McTaggart. Now, technically, Excalibur does have heavy connections to the X-Men as well, but Moira McTaggart is the best person who can do some lab work on you to figure out what's going on with you. So, of course, this takes us back over to the present day. And we see that Nate has arrived to Muir Island. Now, with Nate Gray only being a telepath now, that means he has to do things differently than usual. And so you have Nate going out of his way to kind of use his powers to hide himself from the sight of Nightcrawler and the rest of Excalibur as well. So he could be right there next to them, but of course, they can't see him. So it's really more of Nate Gray just trying to work his way through Muir Island, work his way through Moira McTaggart's laboratory to hopefully find her so that she could actually help him figure out what's going on with him. The problem is that once he does reach her lab and finds Moira McTaggart, you have Moira McTaggart reveal that she knew that Nate Gray was on the island, but you also have Moira McTaggart go out of her way to put on a helmet to protect her mind from Nate Gray's powers. Now, we also have to remember that when it comes to Moira McTaggart, she's the only human right now we know of who currently has the legacy virus that's currently killing off mutants left and right. But she's the only human right now who has the legacy virus. Now, after a brief moment, we do see that Moira McTaggart try to call up Forge. And the reason why, because for Nate Gray in his old reality, better known as Age of Apocalypse, Forge was like a father figure to him. And so he was kind of hoping to see the Forge of this reality who could possibly help him figure out what's going on with his powers. But around his time in Marvel Comics, X-Factor and Forge were quote-unquote dead at the moment. Now, with that being said, for Moira McTaggart, she wants to step in where Forge can't. And so she wants to help out Nate. And let's not forget that in an earlier storyline, it was her who discovered that when it came to Nate Gray, his powers were killing him. Because for Mr. Sinister in the Age of Apocalypse reality, he wanted to create a weapon to use against Apocalypse, which was Nate Gray. But at the same time, he wanted to make sure that if Nate Gray got too powerful, he could possibly kill off Nate Gray. And so that failsafe was if Nate Gray's powers just keep being used more and more often, then he will slowly kill off his body. He will slowly die. And so for Moira Taggart, it's her right now wanting to run a few more tests to figure out what's happening to Nate Gray's body. Like, why in the world he's no longer able to access half of his abilities. Now, something else we do have to talk about, and that would be Dark Beast. Now, for Dark Beast, he had recently joined the Brotherhood that's being led by Havoc. You see, around this time in Marvel Comics, for Havoc, he had officially left X Factor once you had Dark Beast being able to take over the mind of Havoc and how you use Havoc to work alongside with Onslaught. But when it came to Havoc, he kind of realized that he should no longer work with X Factor, but no longer work with the X-Men as well. Because yes, he still believes in Charles Xavier's dream, the whole idea of mutants and humans working together in harmony, living together in harmony. But for Havoc, he wants to cross some lines to be able to reach that actual goal. And so he had created the Brotherhood. And so with that being said, he also recruited Dark Beast as well. Now for Dark Beast, this man got plans on plans. But for Dark Beast, he wants Nate Gray. But it's also him kind of using a sell pitch over to Havoc saying, listen, if you want to change the world, you need to get your hands on Nate Gray. And so you have Dark Beast tell Havoc where he can find Nate at. But as we do switch over to Nate Gray, we're seeing Nate Gray now being attacked by Moira Taggart. Now, for Moira Taggart, this is a test technically. The problem is that she does not tell Nate at all. And here's the reason why. Because she wants to see if Nate being attacked will help him re-unlock his abilities to use as a way to protect himself from her. And so right now, it's her kind of seeing, will Nate be able to use his telekinesis? The problem is that he can't. And for Moira Taggart, she kind of realized what's currently going on. You see, she realized that it's Nate right now somehow suppressing his own abilities. And so for Nate Gray, this hits him pretty hard because it was already bad enough to hear the fact that like, oh, your powers are basically killing you off. But now you were talking about the idea that his own powers being locked away from him, powers that he used every day. Now, while you have Nate Gray kind of inform Moira Taggart that he will most likely be leaving, that is when he's confronted by the Brotherhood. That will be Havoc and Fatale. And of course, it's Havoc saying like, hey, why not go ahead and join the Brotherhood? And so now we have to switch over to Department H. Now, Department H is a branch of the Canadian government that is sanctioned, supported, and monitored all the superhuman activity in Canada. Now, when it comes to Department H, around this time, Marvel Comics, what they were trying to do was reclaim their properties. So if you were a person, an item, or whatever, they would try to reclaim it. And so right now, they have reclaimed a mutant they're trying to transport on this train. Now, for Department H, they did bring a few guards with them, and they are called silencers. But yes, they're right now currently transporting the mutant, and that brings in the Brotherhood. Now, while you do have Nate Gray trying to help out Havoc and also Fatale on this mission, is Nate Gray kind of realizing that he has to do things a tad bit different now, because usually he has all of his powers for him to use against his enemies out there in the field. But with the idea that half his powers are no longer around or just locked away at the moment, for Nate Gray, he has to try things a tad bit different. He has to be more aware of his surroundings because now he's no longer able to block the different attacks that are thrown at him. He has to evade them. He has to hide in the shadows. He has to use mind games to get around all his different enemies. But at the same time, he still is a useful person out there in the field. And so for Nate, we see him being useful for Havoc and also Fatale. Now, for a brief moment, we do switch over to the home of Nate Gray and Trinity. They did share this home together for a very short period of time, but with the two characters technically going their separate ways, no one's there currently. But the thing is, something is happening in their home. Something to come down the road in a later story, possibly. Now, when it comes to Fatale, we do learn that she's still kind of working for Dark Beast. And technically, when it came to Dark Beast first arriving in this reality, because he's from the age of Apocalypse reality, she was always working with him, for him. And so, even though technically both characters are now working with Havoc as the idea of the Brotherhood, she still works for Dark Beast. And so, Dark Beast was the one who told Havoc to go find Nate Gray, but also make sure that Nate Gray does not find out about Dark Beast, because Nate and Dark Beast, they don't get along very well. Really more, Nate hates Dark Beast. And he knows if Nate finds out that Dark Beast is part of the Brotherhood, that could ruin their plans. So Fatale is teleporting back to where Dark Beast was at to tell him like, hey, listen, Nate has no idea about you just yet. Now, once you do have the heroes being able to get the train back over to their base, you didn't have Aurora be revealed to Nate Gray, finding out who she is. But you also have Nate realize when it came to Fatale, she was pretending to be one of the silencers, the guards for Department H on the train. But it's also Nate kind of wondering, like, if she was on the train the entire time, then why she didn't grab Aurora and teleport out of there, because she has the ability to teleport. Now for Havoc, we can tell that he's kind of lying to Nate Gray by telling Nate like, oh, you know, we all have our limits, kind of hinting at the idea that she can't really teleport that far. But in reality, she can, but also because she has some side missions as well. But right after that, you then have Havoc take Nate Gray over to this room. Now, this room is better known as the meditation room. And the machine inside there should help Nate Gray access the powers that were currently locked away from him. Because now it should work on his brainwave, dive deep into his mind to figure out where the blockage is actually at. And the thing is, it does work, but you don't really have Nate Gray question Havoc where the device came from and how does it actually work. But either way, you do have Nate Gray being able to regain the powers that he had currently lost. Now, you do have Nate go check in on Aurora, but when he does, he also sees Fatale in there as well. Now, here's the thing, because it's Nate Gray beginning to kind of think the Brotherhood is probably the best option for him to be at. Because for the X-Men, they have too many guidelines. They follow way too many rules. They're afraid to cross the line. But the idea of the Brotherhood being able to cross the lines to help reach the goal that Charles is supposedly trying to reach is a great idea for him, because now he no longer has to focus on what's the right thing to do when you're out there in the battlefield. Now, for me personally, the Brotherhood is kind of like X-Force, but by this point, X-Force is no longer what they used to be when they first appeared in 1990s for Marvel Comics. But you do have Nate Gray go check in on Aurora. She says thank you, and that kind of begins the process of these two characters building a bond with one another. But for Nate Gray, this is where things kind of go south for him, because you didn't have Nate Gray walk around the tunnels of the base of the Brotherhood, and then he finds this locked door. Now, you do have Nate being able to unlock the locked door, but when he does, he sees all this gas inside of there, CS9. The thing is, this gas was on the train. So how in the world did it get there? Well, for Nate Gray, he realized the gas was teleported there by Fatale. That is why she wasn't really able to teleport Aurora off the train, because she had a different mission. And for Nate Gray, he has to confront Havoc about this. And so you do have Nate Gray confront Havoc about it. Except when Nate does confront Havoc about it, it's Havoc saying like, listen, the reason why Fatale was not really able to teleport Aurora off the train because her primary mission was on Aurora. Her primary mission was to get the gas off the train. Now for Nate, he does get very upset by this, but it's Havoc telling him like, dude, we had a mission and mission is accomplished. But for Nate, he wants the honest truth to everything. So he begins to look into the mind of Havoc. Now for Havoc, he's not scared to allow Nate Gray into his mind. In matter of fact, he brings down all defense walls in his mind to allow Nate to look into it. And so when Nate does, he realizes who actually helped him regain his abilities. Of course, that being Dark Beast. Dark Beast was the one who had created a device that allowed Nate Gray to get his abilities back. And now Nate knows. And so as we dive into the next chapter, it's really more of us seeing Nate Gray really expressing how angry he is about the idea that he was used by Dark Beast in the Brotherhood, but also the fact that Dark Beast helped him, but also for Nate Gray, he remembers Dark Beast from his old reality. He remembers how evil Dark Beast was. He remembers that Dark Beast worked alongside with Mr. Sinister, who worked alongside with Apocalypse. He knows that Dark Beast had killed off so many people in his old reality. And so for Nate, he's trying to express to Havoc and to Fatale that they have an evil person next to him, that Dark Beast is somebody they should not be working with at all. But for Havoc, he has a counterattack to that actual argument. Because for Havoc, what he says is this right here. Think about this, Nate. Out of everyone who's been around so far, who has truly helped you recently? And that would be Dark Beast. When it came to Moira McTaggart, she could not figure out how to actually help you regain your abilities. But you know who did? Dark Beast did. And so for Nate Gray, he kind of hates the idea that that's the truth right there that Havoc has thrown right in his face. But for Nate Gray, he still wants to leave. So you have Nate Gray blast a hole in the building that leads over to Aurora to grab her and get her the heck out of there, because he believes if he does leave her behind, there's a possibility that Dark Beast might do something to her. Now, in an earlier storyline, we had learned that when it came to Aurora, she had a mental illness. Multiple personality disorder. And so when it came to Aurora around this time in Marvel Comics, I want to say that there were just two personalities. I could be wrong there, but I do know that when it came to Dark X-Men, they had discovered a range more of them in her mind. But for Nate Gray, it's him kind of telling us that there's only two right now in her mind. And the first one he meets as he walks into the room is this confident person who's just down with the idea of leaving with Nate Gray because he helped save her from Department H. But the other personality is completely different. This other one is scared of Nate Gray. She wants to find her missing brother. And so for Nate, he begins to realize that maybe, just maybe, that this is possibly the best scenario for her. Because if Dark Beast was able to help him regain his abilities, what if there's a possibility that they could help her? Now, while you have Nate Gray trying to leave, this kind of leads into Nate Gray remembering things from his reality when he first escaped from Mr. Sinister's lab, where as soon as he was able to make outside the lab, he was then confronted by Northstar and also Aurora, and also Havoc as well. Now in that reality, they worked for Apocalypse. So in his mind right now, he has a bad image of those characters, even though in this reality, they're good guys, quote unquote good guys. But for Nate Gray, his mindset, the things he remembers about them was truly like just evil. They attacked him, but he was able to get away by using his abilities. But back in the present day, you didn't have Nate Gray be confronted by Havoc of our reality. And so for Havoc, it's really more him trying to convince Nate Gray not to leave by basically saying like, hey, listen, like, I get the idea why you don't want to work with the X-Men because they're afraid of crossing the lines. And matter of fact, when it comes to the X-Men, they're really big on policing the mutant race, because if we played as the nice mutants to the humans, then maybe down the road, mutants and humans might have the possibility of living together in harmony. But what if you have a group of people who are out there going after humans who might attack mutants down the road? Like, that is what the Brotherhood is doing right now. Now, for Nate Gray, he also knows that Havoc is Scott Summers' brother. So technically, he's kind of like his uncle, but not really, because again, Nate Gray is from a different reality. But it's also Nate Gray pointing out that there's something motivating Havoc to do all of this. Now, for Nate, he believes because knowing Havoc's past, it's the whole idea that he has been controlled by so many other people over the years that this is him finally being able to break free. Now, also for Nate Gray, because he remembers Havoc from his reality, it's him kind of saying like, this Havoc is getting just as dark as the other Havoc in the Age of Apocalypse reality. But you didn't have Nate Gray be confronted by Fatale. Now, Fatale's kind of able to play a little mind game on Nate Gray, but not in a way like she's a psychic. More like, okay, I can tell you're lonely and you need some company. So you have her being able to kiss Nate Gray and distract him a tad bit. But we now shift over to, well, Sebastian Shaw and also, well, Madeline Pryor. And the reason why, because we do see that Madeline Pryor has officially joined the Hellfire Club. Now, with her joining the Hellfire Club, it brings in a brand new alliance, Sebastian and also Madeline. And so with this alliance, you do have Celine kind of being concerned about it. And so she tells Fitzroy and also she tells Tessa they must do something very soon to break up this brand new alliance in the inner circle when it comes to when it comes to Madeline Pryor and also Sebastian. But you didn't have Nate Gray go confront Dark Beast. Now, when he does, at first, it does seem like it's Nate Gray wanting confirmation that Dark Beast could possibly help him. But in reality, it's Nate Gray asking Dark Beast, can he help Aurora? Because he wants to make sure that Dark Beast stays on the right side, like not try to use her in some kind of evil plan of his. And you do have Nate Gray punch Dark Beast to say like, if I find out you did anything to her, I'll come back here and there'll be more problems down the road between us. But to close on this chapter, you didn't have Nate Gray go over to where the Brotherhood was keeping the gas at. And for Nate Gray, he realized this gas is way too lethal to leave out there for anyone to use. So you have Nate Gray close the locked door behind him. And the thing is, he's now trapped inside because on the outside of that door is Havoc and Fatale who are trying to stop him. Now, once you do have them being able to open up the actual door, they find Nate Gray, but he had released the gas. And let's not forget, this gas is lethal. So we're kind of left with the idea that Nate Gray is dead. And so as we do transition over to the next chapter, the final chapter of the storyline, we really do pick up with Nate Gray being pulled into the afterlife. It really does seem like his soul has left his body, and there's a huge possibility that he might actually die here. Now, for Havoc and also Fatale, they're not really able to get over to Nate Gray because once the gas went off, that entire room got sealed shut. And matter of fact, the whole entire base getting shielded right now to kind of allow the gas to stay down there before it's able to actually escape. Now, while you do have the two characters trying to leave, you didn't have Dark Beast communicate to the heroes like, hey, listen, Nate Gray is dead. Like, right now, all the different readings I have on his body is telling me that he is no longer around. So you do have the two characters leave, but for Havoc, he's now kind of wondering like, what is the actual next direction for the Brotherhood at this exact moment? Now, before we jump back over to Nate Gray, we jump over to the morgue. And the reason why, because in this morgue, you do have somebody who was a Jane Doe wake up and being able to walk out of the morgue. The problem is that you have other people who are dead in the morgue also being able to get back up and follow this person out of the morgue. And we're kind of left to wonder who it could possibly be. And so really right now is Nate Gray being visited by different spirits, starting off with technically his own spirit, like his own soul is there right now trying to have a conversation with him. And really it's more of his spirit saying like, look at you, here you are just laying here, somebody who realized that there was no place for you in the past, but you did not try to make a place for you in the future. But here you are right now dying. Now, really, it's more his soul trying to get him to get back up again. Like, yes, you finally re-unlocked the powers that you had locked away. And maybe, just maybe, this could be your end because your body was technically dying because of your powers. But then he's visited by another spirit. This time it's Trinity. And with this spirit being here, it's really more kind of like her calling out to him in a way of saying like, don't go into the light. Like she's waiting for him to come back. She's hoping in the possibility that they could get back together again, but he has to come back to reality. Now, for Nate Gray, seeing his own spirit, but also seeing Trinity as a spirit, it kind of had Nate Gray believe that he was still alive. But then he sees Forge as a spirit, the Forge from his reality, who is kind of like a father figure to him. And seeing that spirit for Nate Gray is him now believing that, yeah, he is officially dead. And so Forge tells him like, yeah, you are dead. Matter of fact, your body is dead. The only thing working right now is that brain of yours. And that's really it. But the final spirit is Madeline Pryor. And when it comes to Madeline Pryor, it's really more of her saying like, look, I am living proof that you have the ability to make it back to this side, like to leave the other side, the afterlife, to come back into reality. Because remember, for Nate Gray, he brought her back to life. And so with that being said to him, then transition over to his soul again, because for the soul is trying to tell Nate Gray, like, you need me and I need you. Basically meaning your body needs a soul, which is me, and me as a soul needs a body. We need to come together as one if we want to make it out of this. And so just like that, you have Nate Gray pop right back up. He pops out of the ground. Now he did use a lot of energy. And the problem is that with him using all of that energy, he does get easily exhausted after being able to escape that area. And he does pass out in the middle of a park. But right after he does pass out, there are 3 ladies who are standing over him. And apparently they were looking for him and grab him. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. I'll see you next time, guys. Later.